I'm not sure why I'm posting this, but I guess I just need to get it all out. For context, I'm Emily, a 27-year-old architect running my own firm. It's not a huge operation, but I've been lucky to build something I'm proud of. People tell me I have a knack for design, and I've worked my ass off to make it this far. I've always been kind of a hopeless romantic, probably too much for my own good. That's how I ended up engaged to Nick, my dad's assistant. He's 33, sharp, charming, and so easy to talk to. We met 2 years ago at one of my father's company events. Nick seemed genuinely impressed with my work, and I remember thinking how refreshing it was to meet a man who didn't feel intimidated by my ambition. Everything happened fast. We started dating, and within a year, he proposed. My dad adored him, and my best friend, Madison, was over the moon for me. She kept saying how lucky I was to find someone who seemed to get me. I thought so too. Nick was attentive, supportive, and funny. But now I wonder if I missed the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first sign of trouble was so small I barely noticed it. Nick had started coming home later than usual, blaming work. I knew how demanding my dad could be, so I didn't think much of it. But then there were the texts, little dings on his phone that he'd glance at and quickly swipe away. When I asked about it, he laughed it off, saying it was just office banter. I wanted to believe him, so I did. After all, I had a wedding to plan, a firm to run, and a major shopping center project due in a month. My plate was overflowing, and I didn't have the energy to dig deeper. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. Nick was everything I wanted to believe in, a partner, a friend, someone who would always have my back. But as I sit here writing this, I'm starting to wonder if he ever truly saw me that way, or if I was just convenient. That's enough for now. I'll share more when I can, but let's just say the cracks I ignored became impossible to overlook. It was a Thursday night, and I was pulling another late one at the office. My shopping center project was in full swing, and I was obsessing over every last detail. Designing this complex was a career milestone for me, and I wanted it to be perfect. By the time I wrapped up, it was almost midnight. I grabbed my things, exhausted but proud of the progress I'd made, and headed home. The apartment was dark when I walked in, except for a soft glow coming from the living room. I thought Nick had fallen asleep watching TV, something he did often. But as I got closer, I heard voices. At first, I thought it was the TV, but the laughter was too real, too personal. And then I saw them. Nick and Madison were sitting on the couch, a bottle of red wine between them. Madison was leaning in close, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. He didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled at her in a way that made my stomach churn. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was intimate, like they were sharing some private joke. I froze in the hallway, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to march in and demand to know what the hell was going on, but another part of me, the part that's always been afraid of confrontation, held me back. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Finally, Nick noticed me. His face shifted from amusement to something like guilt, but it was so fleeting I almost missed it. "Hey, Em," he said casually, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "You're home late." I forced a smile, pretending I hadn't noticed the way Madison's hand lingered on his arm. "Yeah, I had a lot to finish up," I said, my voice barely steady. "What's going on?" "Oh," Madison stopped by, Nick said, reaching for his glass of wine. "She said she hadn't seen us in a while and thought it'd be nice to catch up." Madison smiled at me, her usual bubbly self. "I hope you don't mind, Em. I was in the neighborhood and figured I'd pop in. Nick and I were just talking about the wedding plans." I didn't know what to say. My gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right, but the logical part of me kept reminding myself that Madison was my best friend. She couldn't. And Nick, he loved me, didn't he? "Of course," I finally said, forcing a smile. "It's nice to see you." I didn't stay in the living room long. I made some excuse about being tired and went to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. My heart was pounding, and my mind was racing with questions I didn't want to ask. Why were they so comfortable together? Why hadn't Nick mentioned she was coming over? And why did it feel like I was the outsider in my own home? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew this was more than just a late-night conversation over wine. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The days that followed were a blur of overwork and overthinking. Nick was acting normal, too normal, almost like he was trying to cover something up. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings, texted me sweet nothings during the day, and asked about my project every evening as if nothing had happened. Madison, on the other hand, had gone quiet. Normally, she would text me every day, memes, random thoughts, wedding ideas, but now. Radio silence. I told myself she was just busy, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I started noticing little things. Nick's phone, for instance, was never out of his sight. He'd always been casual about leaving it lying around, but now it was either in his pocket or face down on the counter. When it buzzed, he'd glance at the screen and quickly swipe away the notifications. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said, "Just work stuff. You know how it is with your dad." It was the perfect excuse, and I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the more I watched him, the more uneasy I felt. His affection felt rehearsed, like he was going through the motions to keep me from asking too many questions. And Madison, well, she was nowhere to be found. One night, after Nick had fallen asleep, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. I reached for his phone on the nightstand. My hands were shaking, and I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to be this person, snooping through my fiancé's phone, but I needed answers. The screen was locked, of course. Nick had changed his passcode recently, claiming it was for security reasons. I put the phone back and sat there in the dark, feeling a mix of anger and shame. Was I losing my mind, or was there really something going on? The next morning, I decided to reach out to Madison. If anyone could put my fears to rest, it was her. I sent her a casual text, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" Hours passed with no response. By the time evening rolled around, I was spiraling. I told myself she'd just forgotten to reply, but deep down, I knew she was avoiding me. That night, I confronted Nick. "Have you talked to Madison lately?" I asked as we sat down for dinner. He barely looked up from his plate. "Not really." "Why?" "She's been kind of distant," I said, trying to sound casual. "I just thought it was weird, considering how close we are." Nick shrugged. "She probably has a lot going on. You know how she is." His answer felt too dismissive, like he didn't want to talk about her. I dropped the subject, but my mind was racing. Why did it feel like everyone was keeping something from me? I tried to focus on my work, the wedding plans, anything to distract myself. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the doubt crept in. Something was happening, something that had the power to tear my world apart, and I was terrified to find out what it was. Still, I knew I couldn't avoid the truth forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to face whatever was going on. I just wasn't ready for how ugly it would get. That weekend, Nick suggested we spend some time apart to focus on our respective responsibilities. "You're so busy with the shopping center project," he said, "and I have some errands to run for your dad. Let's catch up in a few days." It sounded reasonable enough, but the timing felt strange. Nick had never suggested we take time apart before. Normally, he'd find ways to involve himself in my work or even hang around while I sketched designs at home. His sudden need for space felt calculated, but I swallowed my doubts and agreed. With Nick gone, I tried to distract myself by diving into work. On Saturday, I was at the office, buried in blueprints, when I got a text from Madison. Madison, hey, sorry I've been MIA. Let's grab coffee soon. I stared at the message for a long time. Coffee? Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't spent an evening in my living room, giggling over wine with my fiancé. My gut told me not to let it slide, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. So I replied with a simple, sure, let me know when. Her response was almost instant, how about tomorrow morning? We met at a small cafe downtown. Madison arrived late, her blonde hair swept up in a messy bun and her smile as bright as ever. She hugged me like she hadn't been dodging me for weeks. You look amazing, Em, she gushed. Work must be treating you well. Thanks, I said, trying to match her energy. How have you been? Oh, you know, same old, she said, waving a hand dismissively. Just trying to keep up with life. I decided to cut to the chase. I was surprised to see you the other night, with Nick, I mean. It's been a while since you've dropped by. Her face froze for a split second before she quickly recovered. Oh, yeah. I was in the area and thought I'd say hi. I didn't think you'd mind. Of course not, I said, forcing a smile. It's just, you seemed really comfortable with him. Madison laughed nervously. Well, yeah, I've known him almost as long as you have. We were just talking about you and the wedding. Nothing weird. I wanted to believe her, but something about her tone felt off. She was trying too hard to act normal, and it only made me more suspicious. Still, I didn't press her. I needed more than vague feelings to justify what was slowly turning into a paranoia spiral. The next day, Nick came home late, claiming he'd been running errands. He smelled like cologne and faintly of alcohol, but I didn't have the energy to question him. Instead, I asked casually, did you see Madison this weekend? He blinked, clearly caught off guard. Madison? No, why? She texted me, I said, watching his reaction carefully. We grabbed coffee yesterday. Oh. That's nice, he said, his voice overly casual. How's she doing? She's fine, I replied, keeping my tone light. Said she's been busy lately. Nick nodded and quickly changed the subject, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. He wasn't a great liar, his sudden interest in my work and overly cheerful demeanor felt like attempts to steer me away from something. And I was determined to find out what. The following week was a whirlwind of deadlines and stress, but my unease only grew. Nick was still being overly attentive, and Madison continued to act like everything was perfectly normal. It was like they were both playing a role, and I was the unwitting audience. Then, late one night, everything came crashing down. I'd left my office early, desperate for some sleep. When I got home, I found the lights on in the apartment. That wasn't unusual, Nick often stayed up late watching TV or working. But when I stepped inside, the sound of laughter stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't just Nick. It was Madison. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding. When I reached the living room, I saw them, Nick and Madison sitting on the couch, drinking wine again. Only this time, Madison was curled up against him, her head resting on his shoulder. His arm was around her, his hand lazily stroking her hair. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands were shaking, and tears stung my eyes. But instead of storming in, I just stood there, frozen, as if moving would make it all more real. Finally, I cleared my throat. They both jumped, Madison scrambling to sit upright and Nick pulling his arm back as if he'd been burned. What's going on? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Emily. Nick said, standing up and walking toward me. This isn't what it looks like. Madison stayed on the couch, her face pale and guilty. Then what is it? I asked, crossing my arms to hide how badly I was shaking. Because it looks a hell of a lot like you two were, cozy. Don't be ridiculous, Nick said, his voice soft, as if I were a child he needed to pacify. We were just talking. Madison had a rough day, and I was comforting her. I looked at Madison, hoping she'd deny it, explain it, something. But she just stared at her wine glass, avoiding my gaze. That's all? I asked, my voice trembling. That's all, Nick insisted, reaching for my hand. You're tired, Em. You've been working so hard. Let's not blow this out of proportion. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't nothing. This wasn't innocent. And the worst part? I still didn't know how much worse it was going to get. After catching them that night, I didn't sleep. Nick stayed up with me, endlessly explaining, reassuring, and begging me to believe him. I would never hurt you, Em, he said over and over, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine concern. Madison is your best friend. She just needed someone to talk to. That's all. But his words felt hollow, like a script he'd rehearsed. Madison left not long after the confrontation, mumbling some half-hearted apology before disappearing into the night. She didn't text or call me after that, which only made me feel worse. The next few days were tense. Nick tried to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the image of them on the couch. It haunted me. I started noticing more red flags, things I'd ignored or explained away before. For instance, Nick's phone buzzed constantly, but he never checked it around me anymore. When I asked why, he said he was just being respectful of our time together. You've been so stressed lately, he said. I don't want you to think work is more important than you. And Madison? She vanished completely. No texts, no calls, no random appearances at our apartment. It was like she'd fallen off the face of the earth. I tried to reach out, but every message I sent went unanswered. I decided to give it one last shot. I texted her, Madison, we need to talk. Please just be honest with me. This time, she responded, I'm sorry, Em. I can't right now. I'll explain everything soon. Her cryptic reply only made my anxiety worse. What was there to explain? If there was nothing going on, why was she avoiding me? Nick noticed how withdrawn I'd become and tried to cheer me up. One night, he came home with takeout from my favorite Thai place and flowers, yellow tulips, my favorite. I hate seeing you like this, he said, sitting across from me at the dining table. Please, Emily. You have to trust me. There's nothing going on between Madison and me. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But his sudden gestures of affection felt forced, like he was trying too hard to cover something up. The doubt was eating away at me, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. So I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to snoop, I hated the idea of invading his privacy, but I felt like I had no other choice. I needed proof, one way or the other. If he was telling the truth, I'd find nothing, and I could move on. But if he was lying, well, at least I'd know. One night, after Nick fell asleep, I opened his laptop. He rarely used it, but it was sitting on the coffee table, unlocked. My hands trembled as I clicked through his emails, his social media, his messages. At first, I found nothing, just work emails and a few casual exchanges with friends. And then I found it. A hidden folder on his desktop labeled personal. Inside were dozens of photos, most of them harmless, pictures of us, his family, trips we'd taken together. But buried among them were a few that made my stomach drop. Madison. Laughing, smiling, leaning close to Nick in ways that felt far too intimate. There were no explicit photos, but the way they looked at each other in those pictures told me everything I needed to know. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in around me. This wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't paranoia. Something was happening between them, and they'd been hiding it from me. The next morning, I didn't wait for Nick to leave for work. I sat him down in the living room, his laptop open on the coffee table. "Explain these," I said, my voice shaking as I pointed to the folder. Nick's face went pale. For a moment, he just stared at the screen, as if willing the photos to disappear. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Emily, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me. About Madison. About everything." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I didn't want to tell you because I knew how you'd react. Madison, she's been going through a tough time. She confided in me, and I didn't think it was my place to share." I laughed bitterly. "So she's just been confiding in you? Over wine? At midnight? In my apartment?" "Yes," he insisted. "I swear, nothing happened between us. Those pictures are just moments. They don't mean anything." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man I thought I knew. But all I saw was someone who had been keeping secrets from me. "You're lying," I said quietly. "I know you are." Nick reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Emily, please. You're overthinking this. Madison and I." "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "Just stop. I'm done with the excuses. I need the truth." He didn't say anything. Instead, he just sat there, his jaw clenched, his eyes downcast. And in that silence, I realized I wasn't going to get the truth from him, not now, not ever. I couldn't confront Madison immediately, I wasn't ready. But I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to hear her side of the story, even if it tore me apart. I sent her one last message: "We need to talk. No excuses this time." Her reply came quickly: "Okay. Your place." I agreed, but as I waited for her to arrive, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. Madison was my best friend. I'd trusted her with everything, my dreams, my fears, my life. And now? Now I didn't even know who she was anymore. When she walked through the door, she looked nervous. "Emily," she began, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. "I don't want excuses. I just want the truth. What's going on between you and Nick?" She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. And then, finally, she said the words I'd been dreading. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It just did." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I stared at Madison, trying to process what she'd just admitted. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What the hell does that even mean, Madison? Did you trip and fall into his arms?" She flinched, her face crumpling as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know I messed up, Emily. I know. But I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. Never wanted to hurt me," I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You've been sneaking around with my fiancé, in my home, no less, and you think apologizing is enough?" Madison wiped at her tears, but she didn't deny it. "It wasn't like that," she said weakly. It started small. We were just talking, you know. About you, about the wedding." He said he felt overwhelmed, and I thought I was helping. "Helping," I said, laughing bitterly. "You thought getting close to him, flirting with him, was helping?" She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. "It was a mistake," she cried. "I know I've ruined everything. But, Emily, it wasn't just me. He pursued it too." Those words knocked the air out of me. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I already knew. Nick wasn't innocent. He'd been complicit in all of this, and I'd been too blind to see it. "What exactly happened between you two?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Madison shook her head, her face pale and stricken. It never went that far, she said. We kissed. Once. And I stopped it. I swear, Emily, that's all it was. I didn't know if I believed her, but at that moment, it didn't matter. Whether it was one kiss or something more, the damage was done. The two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me, and there was no coming back from that. I want you to leave, I said coldly, stepping away from her. I can't even look at you right now. Emily, please, she pleaded, reaching for me. I don't want to lose you. You're my best friend. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. You lost me the moment you decided he was worth risking our friendship for. Get out. Madison hesitated, her face crumpling with guilt and sorrow, but eventually, she turned and left. The moment the door closed behind her, I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The next evening, I confronted Nick with Madison's confession. I wanted to see if he'd admit to it, or if he'd keep lying to my face. Madison came clean, I said the moment he walked through the door. She told me everything. Nick froze, his keys still in his hand. Everything? He asked, his voice careful. Don't play dumb, I snapped. She admitted you two kissed. In my apartment. While I was at work, killing myself to plan our future. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Emily, it was a mistake. I don't even know how it happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's exactly what she said. Do you two rehearse these excuses together, or is this just the universal language of cheaters? Nick stepped closer, his hands outstretched as if to calm me. It was stupid, he said. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything. You're the one I want to marry, Emily. Marry? I repeated, my voice breaking. How can you even say that after what you've done? How am I supposed to trust you ever again? I'll do anything to fix this, he said, his voice desperate. I'll cut her out of my life. I'll go to therapy. Whatever it takes. I stared at him, my heart breaking all over again. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the life we'd been building together. But the other part, the part that had been crushed under the weight of his betrayal, knew I couldn't. You already broke it, I said quietly. And I don't think I can fix it. Nick didn't argue. He just stood there, silent, as tears streamed down my face. For the next few days, I kept my distance from both Nick and Madison. I threw myself into work, desperate to find some semblance of normalcy. But no matter how hard I tried, the pain followed me everywhere. Every blueprint, every meeting, every coffee break was overshadowed by the weight of what had happened. I couldn't escape the questions racing through my mind. Should I try to salvage the relationship? Could I forgive him, and her, for what they'd done? Or was it time to let go and start over? I'd never felt more lost in my life. But slowly, painfully, I began to realize that staying with Nick wasn't an option. Even if I could forgive him, I'd never forget. And what kind of marriage would that be, built on a foundation of mistrust and betrayal? One evening, as I sat alone in the apartment my father had given us, I made my decision. I wasn't going to marry Nick. I wasn't going to give him, or Madison, any more of my time or energy. I deserved better. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. When I told Nick it was over, he didn't fight me. He begged, he cried, he made promises I knew he couldn't keep, but he didn't fight. Deep down, I think he knew it was the only outcome. You're making a mistake, he said as he packed his things. I love you, Emily. I'll never stop loving you. I didn't respond. I couldn't. All I could do was watch as he carried box after box out of the apartment, taking with him the life we'd planned together. When he was finally gone, I sat in the empty living room, the silence almost deafening. It hurt so much, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. Like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. In the days following Nick's departure, the apartment felt eerily quiet. I'd spent so much time envisioning our future here, lazy Sundays on the couch, dinner parties with friends, maybe even raising a family someday. Now, every room felt like a monument to what I'd lost. But instead of wallowing, I decided to take action. I boxed up every trace of Nick, his clothes, his books, the little knickknacks he'd scattered around the apartment. By the end of the weekend, the space felt emptier but somehow lighter. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. Work became my refuge. The shopping center project, once a source of stress, now gave me purpose. Late nights at the office kept my mind busy, and my team rallied around me, unknowingly offering the support I desperately needed. They saw me as a leader, a strong and capable woman, and for the first time in weeks, I started to believe I could be that person again. Then there was Madison. Or rather, the absence of Madison. She tried calling me a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Her betrayal cut deeper than Nick's in some ways. She was my best friend, the one person I thought I could always count on. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. Eventually, she sent me a text, "Emily, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I miss you. Please, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "I need time. Please respect that." It wasn't the closure she wanted, but it was all I could give. A week later, I received an unexpected visit from my dad. He knew something was wrong, he'd always been able to read me like a book, but I hadn't told him about the breakup yet. When he walked into the apartment, he took one look at my face and frowned. "Where's Nick?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "He's gone," I said finally. "We're not together anymore." My dad's expression darkened. "What happened?" At first, I tried to brush it off, but the words came tumbling out before I could stop them. I told him everything, Nick's late nights, the photos, Madison's confession. By the time I finished, my dad looked furious. "That bastard," he muttered. "I trusted him. I brought him into our lives, and this is how he repays us." "It's not your fault," I said quickly. "You couldn't have known." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I should have seen it. I should have warned you." His guilt broke my heart, but there was something comforting about having him on my side. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel so alone. Before he left, my dad said something that stuck with me. "You're stronger than this, Emily. Don't let them take anything else from you. Not your happiness, not your future." I nodded, holding on to his words like a lifeline. It's been 3 months since Nick and Madison blew up my life, and I won't lie, there are still days when it hurts. When I see a happy couple on the street or hear a song we used to love, it feels like a knife twisting in my chest. But those moments are fewer and farther between. I've started therapy, something I probably should have done years ago. My therapist has helped me unpack not just the betrayal but the patterns in my life that made me ignore the red flags. She's taught me to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, and, most importantly, to forgive myself. The shopping center project turned out to be a huge success, and with it came new opportunities for my firm. I've thrown myself into work, not as an escape, but as a reminder of what I'm capable of. For the first time in a long time, I feel proud of myself. As for Madison, I haven't spoken to her since that last text. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to rebuild that friendship, or if I even want to. Some bridges are better left burned. And Nick? I haven't seen or heard from him since he moved out. Part of me wonders if he regrets what he did, but the rest of me doesn't care. I've let go of the idea that closure has to come from someone else. I'm creating my own. If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that people aren't always who they seem. Trust is a fragile thing, and once it's broken, it's almost impossible to put back together. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I ever realized. I'm capable of picking up the pieces, of moving forward, of building a life I'm proud of. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, know this: you're not alone. It's okay to grieve, to be angry, to feel lost. But don't let it define you. You're so much more than the pain someone else caused you. As for me, I'm still figuring it out. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. And that's enough for now.